Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We are here with Susan Schwartz, who is a leadership and management coach. She is a speaker, she's an author. She equips expert professionals who are moving into manager and partner tracks to develop the necessary skills to build better relationships and communicate effectively. We're going to hear all about leadership, emotional intelligence, how to use the tools at our disposal to drive organizational change and technology transformation and so much more. Susan, glad to be talking to you.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Robert.
You're very welcome, and thank you for showing up. And I've heard this term, this emotional intelligence, for probably the last 5 or 6 years now. And it's one of those things where so much time has passed at this point, I'm afraid to even ask exactly what it is for fear of looking stupid. I feel like I sort of kind of have an idea, but this term emotional intelligence, what the heck is it and why is it so important?
Well, frankly, emotional intelligence can be interpreted in a variety of ways. There are some people who speak about emotional intelligence as your deep down inner core and truly being in touch with yourself. And then where I look at emotional intelligence is it is how you react to the external situation and how people are behaving and then the situation around you. So it's almost like saying it depends. And so I think of it as this external tool that you do need to reflect on some of your beliefs and how you want to come across and how you want to be seen, and that it's a combination of observations and choices. So you observe somebody, what they say to you, the situation, and then you choose how to respond. I almost call it like a GPS. So that if you're speaking with your boss, you may respond to something that he or she says in one way. If someone who reports to you says the same thing or asks the same question, you might respond to that question in a different way based on the context. And that's when I think about emotional intelligence. It's looking at the situation and determining what is the appropriate behavior to what's going on. Sometimes I like to call it wisdom. I really wish that we had a different term to describe it. And very often, experienced people who have sort of learned this and gotten the bumps and bruises do this naturally. This is simply a framework that helps you put this tool into action.
So we're talking about it's on the right track. It's getting me there because it makes me think about times when I've been nervous or I've been maybe more focused on what I'm doing or I'm saying as opposed to someone else. And maybe kind of like you said in there, like maybe reacting the wrong way or worried about that. And what also comes to mind many times is how like you might see someone with a lot of power or like a politician or someone who's like a business owner really get stressed out, angry, upset. And it makes you wonder, like, should that person even have any sort of authority if they're not even in control of these emotions? And so you're saying that there's like this wisdom and there's this aspect of like thinking things through so that way you react appropriately. And that's been on my mind the last several years as well, just that whole idea of like slowing down and reflecting and thinking about what you believe. So that way you are clear. And that way, if someone has intruded on your boundaries or if you've gone past your boundaries, then that's something to be corrected. But it's one of those things where I feel like the more I think and talk about it, the more vague it gets, the less I understand it. And so is that a common problem, just being unable to even really like physically grasp the whole concept?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes people will ask me a question in conversation, and then they'll ask me another question, and it sort of flips my perspective. And when I'm trying to explain it, then I realize I need to explain it differently because of where they're coming from. So it's not just one type of tool. You need to, because it's for you and it's how you show up in the world. I like to say it's how you see the world and how other people see you. So one of the traits is stress management. And if you're being a leader, not only do you have to think about how are you reacting to the stress, change is the only constant we have. The recent pandemic, 15 months ago, we all had to shift overnight. And the people who report to us, or if we're leaders and say a nonprofit, and the volunteers, they're all looking to you to see how you're going to react. And so you have to kind of balance your reactions and at the same time be a leader and try to be confident and help guide your people so they can react more positively and not run around like chickens with their head cut off. So it's a balance. And one part, the model that I use for emotional intelligence is called the EQI model. And what I like best, I work with technical professionals, is that the assessment comes back, it's color coded, there's a bar chart, it's very tangible, and it's based on a normal curve. So 100 is the top of that normal curve, even though we're taught in school that you want to strive for 100, that is perfection. Some people will say, well, you have more emotional intelligence than somebody else, or do you have enough emotional intelligence? And it's not a quantity. It's not like 94 to 100 is an A and 93 is a B. What the normal curve does is it gives you a score, and 100 means that 50% of the people are less engaged in a certain trait, and 50% of the people are more engaged in that trait. And there are 15 different traits. So let's just say that some people are very introverted. I have a dear friend who is. She has fabulous writing skills. She writes the very best emails. So when you look at writing, if that were to be one of these traits, she's totally engaged. That's her strength. On the other hand, she does not like to think on her feet. She likes to think and reflect. And so being in a business meeting stresses her out. If you could pair her with someone who's very engaged, who thinks quickly on their feet, that has that gift of gab, they're the ones that write 3-paragraph emails, and by the end of it, you can't figure out what they mean, so you have to pick up the phone to speak with them. Well, they want you to pick up the phone and speak to them. Whereas my friend who is very, very introverted, she writes great emails because she doesn't want them to call her back. So do you see, when you put them together, they balance each other out. And when they work together, they will build on each other's strengths. The person who's so good on their feet will learn how to write better emails. And that person will help my friend become more confident speaker, extemporaneous speaker. And so when I talk about behaviors and choices, you get to make a choice if you want to become more engaged. It might be through exercises, maybe it's a training program, or you might bring somebody on board your team who has that strength, because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so, for example, my friends think it's very odd. Impulse control was one of my least engaged traits. I think it was a 68. Whereas reality testing was one of my strongest traits. It was maybe a 128, a 130. What that means is, while I think about jumping off the bridge, I evaluate the situation, I realize it's going to hurt, and so I choose not to jump off that bridge. So I can be very, very creative. On the other hand, I can evaluate it to see if there's a return on investment on this incredible idea. And so that's the balance. Now I could practice, I could get coaching, I could become more engaged in impulse control. The question is, then I might not think of all these fabulous ideas. So when I'm building a team, I look for people who will ask me those questions, who won't just say, oh, she's the leader of the team, I can't talk with her. I want somebody that holds me. I don't want to say holds me hostage, but asks me those hard questions that are going to make me think through it. And so that's how I balance things out, is finding somebody that will leverage, take what is not so engaged, and they'll be the person to engage that lesser engaged trait. Is that helpful?
It does, and it makes me think about a couple of things that happen with this whole like psychological testing. Is that you sometimes hear about the tendency to like bastardize the tool and use it for the wrong purpose, and to say everyone needs to take a personality test, and we're only going to hire this personality type, and then you end up with a lot of sameness. So this is great thinking in terms of the pieces of a team and pairing people off. And then because you also come across that idea of, okay, you have strengths and weaknesses, and do you work on your weaknesses or work on your strengths, right? And it's like, well,
Exactly.
working on the strengths, it seems to be that's maybe like what you should be doing, or what you should be maybe consciously or short-term doing. And then weaknesses are still things to be improved, but maybe that's more slow going, and maybe that's more of a teamwork issue where you pair, instead of trying to work on your weaknesses by yourself, you pair up with someone who has strengths where your weaknesses are, and then that way maybe it happens kind of automatically on its own without you having to go through things the frustrating way, the hard way. At least that's those are the things that come to mind when we talk about this.
Right. And some of those people that you spoke about, maybe they shouldn't be leaders, which a lot of us think. I'm sure we've all worked for managers who were like, holy smokes. And they got promoted because they were so smart. They were so expert in their field. They got fives. They were top performers. They got promoted for their expertise. Nobody thought about their people management skills. What were their skills that were able to engage and motivate people? And it's not bad. Those are all skills that can be practiced. I don't necessarily want to say learned, because I believe everybody has it within them if they, have the opportunity to pull them out and to practice. And you're absolutely right. And leadership is not a solo sport. A lot of people think that when they have the term manager, that they're there all by their lonesome. And they're not. Their strength is coming from giving confidence to their team, bringing them together to collaborate. And then those people on the team, you have their back and they're going to have your back. When a project explodes, they may not wait and say, oh, Susan's in a meeting, we can't do anything till Susan gets out of the meeting. Hopefully they're involved enough. There are times where they need to come and yank the manager out because it is that explosive. But if they have confidence and they have ownership, they could start trying to resolve the problem. So by the time I got out of the meeting, it might have been fixed already. Or they would have gone through some of the analysis. And when I got out, I could respect and applaud them for getting from point A to B, and together we could get to C and the resolution. And so that's where really activating and trying to bring people together, knowing the strengths of your team, is also very, very helpful.
And you hear about that a lot, the whole Peter principle concept of being so good at your job that you get promoted, but then you're out of your element and you don't have these necessary skills in order to manage your team. And this whole concept you're talking about of letting your team run with it and take risks and solve problems and being proactive, that has been on my mind these last couple of months, because I've been building a team and like a remote team of workers. And I've gone through kind of all the, maybe the growing pains, the hurt of like having turnover or like hiring this person or butting heads and feeling almost at first like it's more work managing them than doing the job for them. But then we got past it, and now we're kind of in the stage of having a team of people and having one person run them and then report to me. And then it's gotten to the point where it's almost a little bit scary because things are happening on their own. And one or two of these people are like making special documents and going and like talking to this customer, and things are happening. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because things are happening without me knowing, and then things are happening without me knowing, right? But both in the good and the bad way. So do you have any advice about that as far as like doing it right, or like growing your team, or or just kind of managing the uncertainty of other people just having fun and going at it? Any ideas there?
Whew. You have been through a huge experience. Congratulations on coming out, on the other side, because change is hard. And you hit the nail on the head right away, is because it would be easier and faster if you just did it yourself. On the other hand, do you have other work that needs to be done as you're building your business and contributing to the success, the top line and bottom line success?
Always. There's always
So
more work to be done.
Yeah, so and that is great that you've developed them and given them the confidence to make those decisions that are, within the realm of their skill set and responsibility, and that you have the communications channel that encourages them to come forward. So I think there's a couple of steps. One is keeping your eye on the mission. If you understand what is your purpose, if your purpose is to make the very best widget possible, if everybody within your organization, that's their same mission, and you might have several work groups that have different functions that integrate and get to that mission to make that very best widget possible. The key is to help each of the working teams recognize and understand how they fit in, where their function contributes, and also to understand what the other teams do and how they can communicate. So again, they can integrate their efforts, not duplicate them, and not let the ball drop. And that way they're all knowing. So when something happens, they recognize where it's another team's function or responsibility, and they have exactly what you've created, is the safe space to pick up the phone or send an email or a text and say, this isn't right. How can we fix it? We need your expertise. And so I think the best thing people can do is to listen to understand, not listen to speak. And so listening to speak is where you spend that time thinking about what you're going to say to react to them, as opposed to listening to understand and gain clarification, asking a few questions to go a little bit deeper. And then you could even ask more questions for the person who brought you the challenge to even possibly work it out for themselves. I had one manager, I went to her and I had a challenge. Her name was Margaret. I said, Margaret, what should I do? And she looked at me and she said, Susan, this is your problem, not my problem. Go back, think about 2 or 3 solutions, bring them back to me, and then we can discuss the pros and cons of each of your solutions. And I think I wasn't happy at the time. I just wanted somebody to tell me what to do. And she pushed me, and she taught me a really valuable lesson that I had power. I was smart enough and creative enough to think about what were possible solutions. And so by giving your team that confidence and pushing them And I'm sure you probably ground your teeth a little bit and squeeze that stress ball as you were doing it. Not because they weren't capable, but because it wasn't a natural um, strategy for you to pursue. It wasn't a natural behavior. Am I guessing right?
Yeah, and it's like we said before, there was the first growing pains of like the day to day. It I would be like doing more work managing them, but now sometimes there are little fires that get started, and I feel like sometimes like half of my day or all of my day is sometimes spent on solving their problem. And so what you're saying here is there's all kinds of little strategies where you can say, well, they have a problem, and instead of you solving it for them or you doing their job for them, you say, come back to me with a couple of solutions, and then we'll talk about that. And so they're like they almost like solve the problem for you. Like this is starting to make sense as far as the like removing yourself, and as far as like giving them some extra freedom, some extra leeway to like kind of grow themselves. And I like also how you said, well, get them involved in the big picture, right? Like you have the mission, and then you have these work groups, and tell the people in the work groups what the mission is, but then also what part of the team they are and what part of the other teams are. I mean, it's a lot of it seems counterintuitive, but it all feels like a step in the right direction. And as you're explaining all of these things, that I mean, it really requires like a lot of like abstract thinking, right? But it seems like the alternative is to try to do it all yourself, which there's only 24 hours in a day you can't scale. So it's like there's two options, right? There's either work your tail off and just try to do the work of 50 people, or do some of this more abstract thinking and do some of this more like careful listening, and telling them, like letting them make their own mistakes, and kind of getting things to where they need to be. Like it's some really heavy, deep thoughts here, but I think it's something that we all need to be thinking about. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like this is a thing that we need to maybe be always revisiting and always thinking about, because if we just think about it once and then say, that's great, I wrote my plan, I put it aside, that doesn't help anyone. So it seems like it feels like there's like constantly having to revisit this as well.
Because things are going to change. Your business purpose will change, technology will change. So how your process, when technology changes or there's some other external happening that causes things to change, and it's sort of wash, rinse, repeat. And that's why I think of it as something very practical, because I was working with one young manager, and there was a rift between sales and the accounting department. And it turned out the rift was not the people involved. They were all good people wanting to do their job. The tough part was management made the metric different for each one. So if their competitive edge was if they allowed people who purchased their product to pay in 90 or 120 days, that was their competitive edge. So they would sell something with a 90-day payment plan, gap. The accounting people got their bonus if they were able to collect the money in 60 days. So if the sales folks promised the client 90 days, then the accountants never had the opportunity to get their bonus. Whereas if the accounting manager stuck to their guns and said, it's got to be 60 days payment, the salespeople wouldn't make the sale. And so when management could fix and make the metrics complementary, or at least able to let each group perform at their best, and moving towards metrics that were parallel, if not integrated, then they're not fighting. And if you're not fighting, you're going to be engaged and become solution solvers. So I can see where each person said, oh, this is our performance indicator. This is when we're doing a great job. Only they didn't think about how the two departments work together. Now, the end of the story is this young manager went back, had some conversations, they made things work, and he got promoted to be in charge of a partner program across a whole continent. So that's, I mean, it is a small company, but it was a really powerful role, and they, offered it to him because they saw how creative he could be.
And
So,
that makes a lot of sense as far as sometimes one little piece in the system is broken or is at odds. And that's a terrible place to be when you're each pulling the rope in opposite directions and getting nowhere. It's worse than having no help, right? It's like you'd rather both people are pulling in the same direction, but if you're just doing it by yourself, that's even worse. But then if someone's at odds with you, which we've all been there in some form or another, in work or in our business, as far as someone else has a different objective than you, and it's not working. I mean, that's something to definitely be avoided. And you've given us a lot to think about here. So what is the next step? If someone out there says, I'm really interested in this kind of team building, system building, dealing with employees and everything like that, and they say, Susan Schwartz seems super smart and the person I need to be talking to, following on social media, buying her book, going to her website, everything. What's the next step? How do people continue the conversation with you?
well, they can connect with me over LinkedIn, and my email is sgs@theriverbirchgroup.com, RIVERBIRCH group.com. I name my company for that. It's a tree on the East Coast, and the bark pulls away. And so I wanted a name that represented my company so that it's always evolving. People are evolving, organizations are evolving. And as that bark pulls away, you have something new to work with. And it starts out as a teeny little sapling. I had one in my front yard. And after 10 years or so, it had this huge trunk. And I couldn't believe I had to hold it together. There were 3 trunks, tiny little spindles. And we had a black, plastic heavy wire keeping it together as a baby tree. And pretty soon the trunk was like 12 inches in diameter. And that's, how companies grow. You start out new, just exactly what you said. You're trying to figure things out. Your team is building, you're building your team. You're going through the, forming, storming, norming, performing phases. And it's really exciting as their teams, as their roots expand and their branches get stronger and more steady. You've got a strong foundation.
I like that metaphor. As you said in the beginning, we can count on change, and that's basically the only thing we can count on, that things will not stay the same. And it seems to be up to us if that changes for the better or for the worse. We can either have growth, or we can have decay, we can have a toxic environment, or we can have something that improves the world. And so if everyone out there who is watching or listening, if this interests you, if you want to see what Susan has going on with organizational change, with emotional intelligence and everything else involved in that and related to that, follow her on LinkedIn. That is SUSANSCHWARTZ. And sgs@riverbirchgroup.com. As we wrap up, wind down here, Susan, do you have any final parting words of advice, any final thoughts as we close the book on this?
Again, emotional intelligence is a practical tool, and it's reflecting on yourself and thinking about how you behaved previously, how you would like to behave, and then walking through just those steps. It's practice. And the more you practice, the quicker, the more natural it becomes. And it's a tool that you focus outside yourself, and it enables you to consider how you're behaving, look at what other people are saying and how they're behaving, and maybe explore their intention. And then you're able to make strong choices to build those collaborative, constructive teams.